My fiancée expressed her desire for an open relationship right before our wedding, which was set to take place in just 2 weeks. This revelation came as a shock to me. I made the difficult decision to cancel the wedding because I couldn't accept her request. Just a few days prior, she suggested that we attend therapy together. She had been seeing a therapist alone and wanted me to join her so we could have an honest conversation before tying the knot. To me, this felt strange. I believed that we were already completely honest with each other. After all, we were about to get married, right? Moreover, she had always been protective about her therapy sessions, rarely sharing details about them. I had never met her therapist before, so being invited to this session felt out of place. When the day of the therapy session arrived, I decided to record the conversation on my phone for my own peace of mind. I waited in the office for about 20 minutes until I was called in. The therapist greeted me warmly, and we exchanged small talk. She then made a comment that caught me off guard, saying I was nothing like how my fiancé had described me. I took it as a compliment but then felt uneasy when the therapist told my fiancé that our discussion might be more challenging than anticipated. Despite my discomfort, I maintained my composure and kept a calm smile on my face as the session began. The therapist gave a brief introduction that I won't go into detail about. My fiancé held my hand, and as the therapist continued speaking, she explained that we live in a modern society. It was at this point that I began to grasp the meaning of her words. My fiancé wanted a non-traditional marriage, which I assumed meant she sought equality in our partnership, embracing the ideals of modern feminism. However, as the conversation progressed, it became clear she meant something entirely different. She expressed her desire to have the freedom to sleep with other men once we were married. This was not the open and equal relationship I had imagined. She insisted that although she wanted this freedom, she wouldn't be comfortable with me having the same kind of relationships. She feared that if I found other women attractive, one could potentially take me away from her, which would break her heart. I let them finish discussing their points, noticing how their confidence grew as I remained silent. It was evident that this conversation had been rehearsed. Eventually, I decided to ask the therapist if she was licensed. Her surprised reaction confirmed my suspicion that my question was unexpected. She replied affirmatively, so I told her to explain to my fiancé why we would not be getting married and why our relationship would end immediately. I wished them both good luck and left the office, feeling a weight lifted off my shoulders. In the aftermath, I considered reporting the therapist's conduct. I wasn't sure whether to go to the clinic where she worked or if there was a governing board for therapists. I wanted to hold her accountable for what I perceived as unprofessional behavior. I knew there would be no positive outcome from the conversation they had during the session. Even if my fiancé had wanted an open marriage where I could also date other women, my decision would have remained the same. To me, that type of arrangement was not a marriage, it felt like a facade. As I reflected on everything, I couldn't shake the thought that my fiancé might have been unfaithful. With this newfound clarity, I recognized how certain details didn't add up. I felt foolish for ignoring the signs. After listening to the recording of the session multiple times, I realized that my fiancé's assumptions about me may have led her to believe I would be easily controlled. However, I am not a doormat, and I am confident that the therapist saw I was not at all like how my fiancé had portrayed me. The situation has turned out to be more complicated than I initially expected. With the wedding called off, people are now increasingly curious and are beginning to ask me about what happened. This has put me in an uncomfortable position, as there are certain questions that I feel ill-equipped to answer. My ex-partner seems to be engaged in some sort of damage control on her end, but I possess a recording that could reveal the truth if she strays too far from what actually happened. I am not one to hold back if I feel the need to clarify things. However, this dilemma is compounded by the fact that my family is also seeking answers. They want to understand what led us to this point, and I'm worried about how my ex might respond to their inquiries. I certainly don't want my parents or relatives to view me as foolish for having allowed my ex to reach a level of confidence where she felt comfortable openly expressing her desires for other men. The situation is further complicated by the fact that she is bombarding my phone, as well as those of my best friend and my brother, with messages insisting that we can resolve this. In a recent therapy session, I found it difficult to grasp what was being communicated to me. The therapist seemed to suggest that my ex was willing to do whatever it takes to amend our relationship, however, this was countered by her reluctance at various stages. It feels like a desperate attempt to keep something that is already slipping away. I have also been involved in discussions about securing a loan for a house, but I've since backed out of that plan entirely. In fact, I have taken significant steps to erase any financial or personal ties between us. My ex's most recent plea involves therapy and a confession about her insecurities concerning our sexual history. I have had more partners than she has, and the therapist proposed the idea of leveling the field, regardless of whether that was truly necessary or beneficial. My patience with this therapist is wearing thin, and I plan to report her once I figure out the appropriate channels and what exactly to say. This post serves as a mix of venting my frustrations while also seeking advice on how to address the inevitable questions from friends and family. My ex is clearly trying to control the narrative, and I want to avoid getting caught in a back-and-forth situation. While I have this recording that could clarify my side, I'm hesitant to share it with anyone, especially since my ex is unaware that I even have it. As a small update, I am currently at work and received confirmation that my ex has gotten her journal back. I sent it out early this morning via our office courier, and she had to sign for it. It seems many people have recommended that I allow her to read it, but I have come to the conclusion that doing so wouldn't be beneficial. She has yet to take any real responsibility for what has transpired. Over the past 2 weeks since my last post, things have taken some interesting turns. Last Monday, I spoke with a lawyer at work about the situation surrounding the therapist. He looked at me skeptically, as if he couldn't believe what I was saying, and even wondered if it was a prank. When I mentioned the recording, his interest peaked. The following day, we discussed it further, and he pointed out several things I hadn't noticed in the recording. The therapist consistently used "we" language implying a collective decision-making process, but she never explicitly stated that my ex asked her to communicate anything specific to me. My lawyer also inquired about my ultimate goal in this situation. He questioned whether I intended to take legal action, which I had never planned on doing. Instead, I believe it would be more appropriate to inform the relevant institutions and allow them to handle the therapist's conduct. We agreed to draft 2 letters, one directed to the clinic where the therapist works and another to the American Psychological Association, since she is accredited. By Wednesday, a few more colleagues at work became aware of what was happening, including a case researcher who dug into the therapist's online reviews. Unfortunately, the feedback was not favorable. Several former clients expressed dissatisfaction with her services. We managed to locate 2 of these clients through social media, and they were willing to share their experiences with us. Their stories were just as troubling as mine, and as we crafted our letters, they grew longer as we included their accounts alongside my own. Last Friday, I had a meeting with my parents and my ex's parents, and it was an important conversation that needed to happen. This gathering provided an opportunity for all of us to discuss the situation directly. My ex was present as well, and additional information came to light that contributed to the report regarding the therapist. This week, we sent out these reports, which elicited a response from the clinic. On Thursday morning, they called our office, likely to determine whether the situation was a prank or a genuine concern. We then had a conversation over the phone with one of their lawyers. Once we confirmed the legitimacy of our claims, we overheard someone else on their end express surprise by saying, "Well, crap." This reaction indicated that they were taking the matter very seriously. One conclusion reached by one of my colleagues was that the clinic probably had received other complaints about this therapist before, but this was the first occasion where someone documented everything so thoroughly. The letter we received from the clinic also stated that we were reporting this to the American Psychological Association, APA, which likely increased the urgency of their response. Although I am unsure what the outcome will be, I consider my personal involvement with this issue resolved. However, after speaking with 2 other individuals who had been treated by this therapist, I sincerely hope that an investigation is conducted. It appears that the therapist has an unsettling demeanor and a concerning agenda. She negatively impacted their relationships as well, and one of the individuals I spoke with was a woman. Last Friday, my parents called me and requested that I visit them after work. When I arrived, I was surprised to find that my ex and her parents were also there. The sight of their cars in my parents' driveway triggered an instinctive desire to leave. This meeting was intended to occur on my terms, but my ex attempted to take control of the situation, which I was determined to resist. When I stepped outside, I found my ex waiting for me. She looked particularly good, embodying the ideal image of someone parents would like to meet. She informed me that her family was there to talk and see if we could resolve our issues. It was evident that either she had not fully disclosed the circumstances to her parents or had provided them with a version of events that they were not completely convinced by. My ex arrived with a journal, claiming that she had started writing in it before beginning therapy and continued to do so up until that Friday morning. She insisted that I read her journal, as she believed it would help clarify our situation. I responded that this was not a book club, and I wanted to head inside and begin dealing with the situation, but she requested just 10 minutes to talk with me alone before I spoke to her parents. As she handed me her journal, she began to cry. Shortly thereafter, my sister and my ex's sister appeared. They had already been inside but came out to check on us. I took her journal, went inside to say hello, and then left my ex alone in a more secluded area of my parents' large garden, which has plenty of trees and benches for privacy. During our conversation, my ex revealed that she had quit her job due to overwhelming stress and had suffered a breakdown. The situation never improved, and she stopped seeing the therapist. Initially, she sought therapy for work-related issues, but over time, the focus shifted entirely to our relationship, which seemed to be the only area that captured the therapist's interest. She never fully explained to her parents why we had broken up, and now she was seeing a different therapist. I chose to listen as she shifted the focus from her struggles to our relationship. She told me that if we were to reconcile, I would have control over our finances, be granted access to all her devices, and be able to track her whereabouts. Furthermore, any property we might own together would be in my name. She expressed a desire for me to trust her again, reiterating things she had mentioned in her messages over the past weeks. She detailed more promises than I could recount, but I am unsure how she believes this would create a healthy dynamic for either of us. I asked her directly if she had cheated on me. She replied that while she had opportunities to cheat, she never did. While I believe her, it also frustrated me. The phrasing suggested that she had placed herself in situations where infidelity could occur. In a committed relationship, one should avoid situations that present the chance to cheat. It's comparable to saying, I had the opportunity to commit a crime today. The question remains, what was she doing that allowed such opportunities to arise? The event that had unfolded felt more like a missed chance than an actual opportunity. Calling it an opportunity seemed misleading, as it suggested a positive outlook on something that had ultimately disrupted our brief encounter. After about 10 minutes, I found myself telling her that we should go speak with our parents about what had just happened. We agreed, but I also asked our sisters to give us some privacy, as the conversation was private and not something they needed to involve themselves in. My sister wasn't pleased with this request. She puffed up and made it clear she was annoyed. However, I realized that like a house built from sturdy stone can withstand storms and hurricanes, my sister was not as resilient, and her emotional responses would not help us in this moment. Once we were alone, I took the time to explain everything that had occurred during the therapy session and shared my determination to work through these issues. I chose not to mention that I had recorded the session because, in truth, I did not have a recording. Surprisingly, my ex-girlfriend corroborated everything I had said about our situation. Her father, visibly moved, had tears in his eyes, which twisted my heart in sadness. Her mother soon chimed in, questioning her if this was truly how she believed they had raised her, wanting an explanation for her actions. My ex proceeded to relay her narrative to them, echoing the same sentiments she had shared with me, the stress she felt from her job, the depression that followed, and how she felt she was breaking down. She talked about how the therapist had focused solely on our relationship, suggesting that it was the core source of her stress. The therapist had led her to believe that I wanted an open relationship, implying that she might lose me if she didn't expand her own sexual experiences to match mine. Listening to her recount these details made her emotional state abundantly clear. My reaction had seemingly jolted her out of her slump. She announced that she had quit her job in search of something less overwhelming, expressing a willingness to do anything to win me back. Tears began to flow down her cheeks as she brought up the journal again, claiming that reading it would clarify everything for me. She insisted that she did not agree with the therapist's views but had simply complied because she felt the therapist's authority and expertise was undeniable. As our parents looked at me expectantly, I remarked that I didn't typically read someone's private journal unless it belonged to a renowned poet who had passed away. That comment turned out to be a significant blunder on my part. In trying to convey that a private journal only becomes public literature under certain circumstances, I unintentionally suggested that my ex's thoughts were less relevant on their own. I had hoped they would understand that I didn't want to read her journal because the past had already unfolded, and what was done was done. However, my comment landed poorly. Everyone stared at me as though I had wished harm upon my ex. The air was thick with tension, and sensing the escalating hostility, I reluctantly agreed to read her journal. Sometimes, in the struggle of relationships, you win some battles but lose others, and in this case, I had clearly stepped in a minefield with my words. My ex was in the process of meeting a new therapist, an older man with a white beard reminiscent of Freud. She shared with her parents the emails confirming her future appointments, and I couldn't help but do a quick online search on him. He appeared to be a reputable figure, married, involved in conferences, and even an author with books available on Amazon. This only intensified my irritation. It felt as if we were being treated like children playing a game, and that adults expected us to simply resolve our feelings without proper recognition of our maturity and autonomy in this situation. Reflecting on our nearly 9 years of knowing each other, with 5 of those as a couple, made it apparent how difficult it would be to return to what we once had. Despite her actions, which might seem justified to some, the idea of reverting to our former dynamic felt impossible. My perception of her had shifted dramatically. She now felt like a stranger to me. Sure, I still found her appealing. She looked stunning the last time I saw her, and there was no denying that. But the attractiveness felt planned, almost like a strategy. Her hair was styled in the way I loved, she wore a dress I had bought for her, and even the shoes were my favorites. There was a trace of the perfume I had given her, and it was hard to ignore the intentionality behind her appearance. The journal lay on my nightstand, unopened and seemingly more a reminder of our complicated past than a gateway to understanding. I perused through it briefly, confirming that it indeed seemed to be a year old. The way the pages were creased suggested time had passed, and the ink color appeared to change gradually from the first page to the last, indicating the writing had occurred over a span of months. I even tested the pen that came with the journal to check for consistency, and everything matched up with how much it seemed to have been used throughout that year. It is important to clarify that the journal in question is not a mere fabrication. Everything observed within its pages aligns with what one would expect from a year's worth of experiences, complete with the natural signs of wear and tear. I find it difficult to ascertain the value of reading it, as it feels more like a tool meant to play tricks on one's mind. I cannot shake the feeling that, when she began documenting her thoughts and feelings a year ago, she did not intend for it to serve as a means of manipulation. According to her, it was her new therapist who suggested sharing the journal with me, perhaps to aid in my understanding of how to cope with the questions posed by others regarding why our wedding plans have been halted. The reason for our decision to postpone the wedding stems from a significant disagreement that we were unable to resolve. The nature of this issue is one that, if her sister were to discover it, would likely become common knowledge, especially considering her sister's close relationship with their mother. This concern is compounded by the fact that our parents have expressed a desire for us to meet again next week, a meeting that they insist will be beneficial for both of us. They have recommended that I read the journal to help me process what has happened, possibly allowing us a chance to start anew, given the substantial history we share. She is set to receive treatment, and I believe that she can overcome her current struggles. Deep down, she remains the person I fell in love with, although she is not at her best right now. Others can sense my lingering affection for her, as it would be difficult for me to act in such a heartfelt manner if I didn't still care deeply. I am uncertain whether I will attend the meeting next Friday, yet I cannot help but reflect on how incredible she looked last time we met. I want to extend my gratitude to the community for their unwavering support and guidance, which has proven invaluable in helping me formulate a plan regarding therapy. I appreciate those who took the time to share resources and insights on how to navigate this complex situation. Now, I am left pondering what should be done with her journal. Should I return it, keep it, or perhaps read it many years from now? As for an update, the therapist who was initially involved with Mel is no longer working at the clinic. The primary reason for this decision likely relates to a lawsuit against the clinic, although I lack specific information about the details of that case. It seems someone completely unrelated to my situation is pursuing legal action against them. The therapist made attempts to contact Mel but was unsuccessful, leading me to suspect that she was seeking information about my report concerning her. It is a possibility, but Mel has chosen not to engage with her, blocking any communication attempts and leaving her inquiries unanswered. There is a nagging voice in the back of my mind, suggesting that my choice to file that report may not have been the wisest decision. This action raises the risk that those involved in the lawsuit might reach out to me for assistance, potentially drawing unwanted attention my way. Despite my awareness of these implications, the knowledge that the therapist is currently facing difficulties brings a certain satisfaction, a feeling I can't quite shake. For those who have questioned my emotional state, I offer this as proof that I do indeed have feelings. If this doesn't suffice to quell your doubts, I hope you can appreciate the sarcasm in my words. However, the situation remains intricate. I mentioned in a previous update my decision regarding the journal, which I ultimately chose to return. The process was methodical. I used a courier service from my workplace to ensure the journal was delivered to Mel that Monday morning. I included a letter explaining my reasons for not reading it, emphasizing that it was rooted in my belief that accepting the journal would mean taking on the emotional burden of our situation. In giving it to me, I felt she was distancing herself from the issue, leaving me to grapple with the responsibility of finding answers. After I learned that the journal had been successfully returned to her, I was suddenly overtaken by a sense of regret. Perhaps I should have taken the time to read it. Later that very day, Mel appeared at my workplace. She did not create any sort of scene or commotion. Instead, she chose to patiently wait in the lobby for me to finish my workday, clearly hoping for an opportunity to have a conversation. It did not take long for me to become aware of her presence, at which point I faced a choice. I could either send her away or engage in a discussion. I ultimately chose to talk with her. During our conversation, we began to unravel the various factors that contributed to the collapse of our relationship. The first issue, stress, was something I was aware of, yet I had never fully grasped the depth of its impact. Looking back, I realized that when she first started seeking therapy to cope with work-related stress, I should have been more attentive. She continually reassured me that everything was fine, so it was difficult for me to question her. However, she experienced a breakdown at work, an event she chose to conceal from both me and her family. I could have been a father, but that dream was dashed when she experienced a miscarriage. She discovered she was a few weeks pregnant and wanted to create a special moment to share this news with me. However, just a few days later, she began bleeding, and the news was no longer something to celebrate. It never became a conversation between us, as she carried the weight of this secret alone. She feared that if I knew, I would view her as unworthy. She understood how deeply I wanted to become a father, and in her mind, she convinced herself that revealing this would lead me to believe that she couldn't bear children. This line of thinking was flawed and misguided. Additionally, I had friends who were in open relationships, and I was open about this in discussions. One of these friends, who I'll call Mela, had reached out almost a year ago. She invited Mela to lunch and began to unload her frustrations about her failed marriage. Her husband had some similarities with me in that we both had experienced more partners than our significant others. In my case, I had 26 previous partners, whereas her husband had an astonishing 70. Once they were married, he insisted on an open relationship, which had left her feeling miserable ever since. This friend warned Mela that if she wasn't careful with me, she might face a similar fate, suggesting that I was exhibiting signs that mirrored her husband's before they tied the knot. We often hold certain beliefs about those we love, but sometimes those beliefs are not grounded in reality. Both of our fathers worked in academia and had known each other for around 30 to 35 years. They frequently attended professional events together, usually accompanied by their spouses. It was at one of these gatherings that I met Mela. I attended with my father, hoping to connect with a professor who could help me advance my career. Mela stepped in for her mother who had a scheduling conflict, but unbeknownst to me, her parents were struggling. Her father's infidelity was causing turmoil, something she only disclosed recently after discussing the concerns raised by the friend mentioned earlier. This revelation hit me hard. I had always viewed her parents as the quintessential perfect couple, a model for relationships. While they managed to resolve their issues, they maintained the facade of a flawless marriage throughout the turmoil. The combination of these complex personal dynamics and a therapist with potentially questionable motives created a precarious situation for our relationship. This therapist was eager to explore the idea of an open relationship, reinforcing what the friend had claimed, that men like me are never truly satisfied with just one woman. The suggestion was that to address my so-called cheating impulses, Mela would need to be involved with other men, at least until the numbers were more balanced. I would naturally oppose this idea, but the therapist suggested that if I truly loved Mela, I would understand. This was a convoluted proposition that she believed would not only address my behavior but also prove my love and ultimately strengthen our bond. It was clear that such a plan could only lead to failure, and I suspected that the therapist was aware of this as well. What the therapist did not anticipate was my swift reaction. Throughout that week, we met every day, and she was open to answering my questions. One thing was abundantly clear: while I was prepared to end our relationship if necessary, she was ready to fight fiercely to save it. By the end of that week, I had to leave for a work assignment in another city. What was initially expected to be a 2-week trip stretched to an entire month due to additional work, leading to more billable hours. Before I left, I gave Mela a copy of the recording from our therapy session. She was aware I had mentioned it shortly after she visited my workplace. Listening to that recording shook her deeply. The memories she held about the therapy session were starkly different from what unfolded in the recording. I believe that moment allowed her to finally understand the roots of my actions and behaviors toward her. Those around me were aware of these challenges, but the true depth of our situation was something Mela was only beginning to grasp. During my work trip, everyone back home was aware of my situation, and for the next 3 weeks, I enjoyed a rare sense of freedom. I was largely left to navigate my own affairs with very little interference, and it was a refreshing experience. Throughout that time, several individuals commented on my posts, extending invitations to grab a beer if I ever found myself in their city. One of those invitations caught my interest, and I decided to take someone up on their offer. This encounter marked the first time I had ever met another Reddit user in person. To my surprise, the experience was far from strange. The person, along with their spouse, turned out to be genuinely wonderful. As I moved into the 4th week, Mela came for a visit. We had kept in touch over the past 3 weeks, exchanging messages on various topics, with the focus primarily on us and our situations. There was, however, one significant issue that needed to be addressed. After our wedding, we had planned a 2-week trip to France, intended as a sort of honeymoon. Due to circumstances beyond our control, we couldn't take that trip immediately after the wedding, so we had rescheduled it for 3 months later. With the date approaching, we found ourselves in possession of non-refundable plane tickets and hotel reservations, yet we were still sorting out our relationship. During that 4th week together, we had heartfelt discussions and ultimately agreed to go to France anyway, but this time as friends. I can already sense the eye rolls from readers upon hearing that phrase. However, I must say, experiencing France was nothing short of amazing. A visit to such a beautiful country offers a stark contrast to life in the US, where it sometimes feels like we are stuck in a more primitive state. It became apparent that Americans could easily be spotted in museums due to our behavior. I genuinely believe that learning how to act in foreign countries should be a required subject in our educational system. Returning from France marked a shift in our relationship. We came back as a couple, though not without acknowledging that there were still challenges to face. The enchanting atmosphere of Paris may have played a role, but rebuilding our connection would be a gradual process. We recognized several important adjustments we wanted to make moving forward, though there was no particular order to our priorities. Mela began her search for a new job, aiming for one with less stress. We both agreed to distance ourselves from certain friends in open marriages, as we viewed their influence as toxic. A name we both love, Mela, will be given to our first daughter when that time comes. I learned the hard way that transparency is crucial, particularly regarding sensitive topics like miscarriage, and I remain deeply upset about that. We also decided to welcome a puppy and a kitten into our home. Mela intends to continue seeing her therapist for a while, which I believe is a positive step. When the time comes for us to get married again, we plan to keep it intimate with just us and our immediate family. Italy is likely to be our next destination, and we look forward to that. While this update may not be the thrilling story some were hoping for, many have asked for news, and I want to clarify that my journey has not involved vengeance or anger. From the start, there was no hatred toward Mela. My actions were grounded in a need for self-protection when her actions suggested that our paths were diverging. Those who expressed concern for her mental well-being should know that there is no cause for alarm. Once the influence of her therapist faded, she returned to her true self, more or less. While these events have undeniably altered us, she is currently in a good space emotionally. You might recall that she offered to give me control over financial matters and access to her devices to foster trust. However, my lack of interest in living that way wasn't just about privacy, it was rather her way of trying to maintain open communication. We both agree that openness regarding our devices has always been a part of our relationship, so nothing will change there. As for our finances, we will continue to share them as we've done in the past. Lastly, I want to express my appreciation to everyone who reached out in the comments and through private messages. The advice I received from many of you has been invaluable, and I will be forever grateful for your support. Writing these posts and engaging with you has served as both therapy and a much-needed outlet.